I've been a nurse for over 15 years, and in that time, I've learned to expect the unexpected. But there's one night shift I'll never forget, one that still haunts me. Not because it was the strangest thing I've seen, but because it could have happened to anyone. It started out like any other night, a quiet shift, not too busy, and I was just getting into my routine. Then I got a new patient, young woman, mid-20s. She came in for a routine post-surgical checkup. Nothing too concerning at first glance. She was recovering from a minor procedure, her vitals were stable, and she was alert and responsive. Her name was Emily. When I introduced myself, she smiled and thanked me for taking care of her. Normal, calm. But as I got her settled, I noticed something odd. She seemed to be waiting, almost like she was expecting something or maybe someone. She kept glancing at the door, her eyes darting back and forth. And when I asked if she was in pain or needed anything, she just shook her head. I assumed she was anxious about her recovery, so I did my best to reassure her. As I was finishing up, the door to her room opened, and a man stepped inside. I didn't recognize him, but he looked to be in his mid-30s, well-dressed, carrying a small overnight bag. He walked right past me, as if he knew exactly where he was going. "Hey, sweetheart," he said to Emily, his voice a little too casual. She smiled weakly and waved him over. I assumed he was her husband, or maybe a close relative. I figured I should step out and give them space. But something about the way he looked at me made me uncomfortable. His eyes lingered on me for just a second too long, and the way he greeted Emily felt off. It was too familiar, too personal. As I was leaving, I glanced back and saw him pull up a chair beside her bed. He took her hand in his and started talking quietly. I could barely hear their conversation, but there was something about the tone of his voice that struck me as strangely rehearsed, almost manipulative. He kept reassuring her, telling her everything would be fine. I brushed it off as paranoia. I'd seen plenty of patients with family members who were a little overbearing or overly involved, but nothing unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. An hour later, I was walking down the hallway when I passed Emily's room again. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard voices inside. Her visitor was speaking, but Emily wasn't responding. I stopped for a moment, straining to hear. He was saying something about getting her discharged early, something about how it was unnecessary for her to stay overnight. "That's not what the doctor said," I heard Emily murmur weakly. "No, it's fine. I'll handle it. You're coming with me." The man's voice was firm, unyielding. Something in me snapped. I pushed the door open quietly, just enough to peek inside. The man wasn't just talking. He was convincing her, practically forcing her. I could see the subtle pressure in his hand as he squeezed hers, the way his other hand hovered close to the foreline, as if checking it. "Emily," I said, stepping into the room, trying to sound casual. "Everything all right here?" The man immediately stood up. "Oh, yes, everything's fine. Just getting her ready to go," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I wasn't sure what it was, but my gut told me to be cautious. I looked at Emily, who was still pale and disoriented. She blinked at me like she was trying to focus, but she couldn't quite make eye contact. "I'm afraid I'll have to double-check with the doctor before you leave," I said, trying to sound polite but firm. The man didn't react well to that. He gave me a tight-lipped smile and started walking toward me. "I think you'll find there's no need for that. She's just fine, and I'm taking her home. She'll be much more comfortable there." I wasn't backing down. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid that's not how it works. You'll need to speak to the attending physician before any discharge is approved." He stared at me for a long moment, his smile fading into something more cold. "I'm her husband," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "And I'm telling you, she's leaving now." The air in the room grew thick, the tension almost suffocating. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I stood my ground, trying to appear calm. I didn't want to escalate anything, but I also knew I couldn't let Emily leave in her condition. She wasn't fit to go anywhere. Suddenly, Emily stirred, as though waking up from a fog. She looked between us, her eyes darting back and forth. And then, as if she had finally come to her senses, She spoke in a voice so quiet I barely heard it. "He's not my husband." The man froze, and I could feel the temperature drop in the room. The smile disappeared from his face, replaced by a blank, unreadable expression. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like something shifted in the air. The atmosphere became thick with danger. Before I could respond, the man's phone rang, and he snapped it to his ear, cutting the tension in the room like a knife. "I'll be back in 5, he said into the phone, turning abruptly and walking out the door without another word. I stood there, trying to process what had just happened. Emily was still staring at the door, her face pale, eyes wide with confusion. "Are you all right?" I asked. She nodded slowly, but then her eyes welled up with tears. "I don't know who he is. He came to see me yesterday. He said he was my fiancé, but I've never seen him before." My blood ran cold. She had no memory of him, no idea how he had gotten in, no recollection of their supposed previous meetings. I don't know how he got access to her, or if he had been in the system somehow, but it didn't matter. He had been playing her the whole time. I rushed to get security and reported it immediately. When they went to review the footage from the security cameras, the man was nowhere to be found. They didn't find a record of him in the visitor logs either. And Emily, she was fine, but confused, and eventually, her family arrived to take her home. They had no idea who the man was either. It took days for the staff to figure out how he got in. No one could confirm his identity. No one could figure out how he'd managed to bypass security or hospital protocols. And even worse, no one had seen him since. Not a single trace. Just a name, a face, and a memory that disappeared. And now, I can't shake the thought that it could have been me or you or anyone. Just a simple visit, a simple hospital stay, and someone with a face you think you know, but really don't. I'll never feel the same about patient visits again, because sometimes the real danger isn't what you can see, but the people who are never supposed to be there.